Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
Today's conversation is about something that confuses a lot of English learners without them even noticing it properly sometimes. The words hope and expect can look very similar at first, but emotionally they feel completely different in real conversations.
I honestly used to think they were almost interchangeable. In my head, both words just meant that you want something to happen in the future.
That's what makes this topic interesting because the basic meaning feels close, but the emotional tone changes a lot depending on which word you choose.
I think I realized that recently after sending someone a message that sounded strange, even though the grammar was technically fine.
What did you say?
I wrote, "I expect you have a good day." The person understood me, but afterward, the sentence started sounding slightly cold in my head for some reason.
That reaction makes sense because native speakers usually say, "I hope you have a good day." The word hope sounds softer and warmer there.
That's what confused me. Both sentences felt positive, but one suddenly sounded emotionally heavier.
Exactly. Hope feels warm. Expect feels heavy. That emotional difference changes conversations much more than learners realize.
I think learners focus so much on dictionary meaning that we sometimes ignore emotional feeling completely.
That happens constantly in English. By the way, welcome to Talk Ava. If you enjoy learning English through real conversations instead of memorizing textbook rules, you can subscribe and continue learning with us every week.
I already feel like this topic is more psychological than grammatical.
It really is because hope and expect quietly change emotional pressure inside conversations. Listen carefully to these two sentences. I hope he comes, then I expect him to come.
The second one immediately sounds stronger to me. It feels more certain somehow.
That's the core difference beginning to appear. Hope usually leaves emotional space for uncertainty. Expect sounds much closer to certainty.
So, when someone says, "I expect him to come," it almost sounds like they believe it should happen.
Exactly. Sometimes expectation even creates pressure without the speaker realizing it. Imagine waiting for a friend at a restaurant. If you say, "I hope she comes," the sentence sounds emotionally open. But if you say, "I expect her to come," the tone feels firmer and more emotionally demanding.
That's interesting because the event itself doesn't change. The friend is still either coming or not coming, but emotionally, the second sentence feels heavier.
That's because English doesn't only describe events, it also describes emotional confidence and emotional pressure. I think I'm starting to notice why expect sometimes sounds slightly intense in relationships.
That's where this topic becomes very important socially. Let's take another example. Imagine someone says, "I hope you reply soon." That sounds soft and polite. Now compare it with, "I expect you to reply soon."
The second one sounds much more demanding. It almost feels like an order instead of a simple feeling.
Exactly. And many learners accidentally create that tone because they only focus on future meaning instead of emotional certainty.
I think expect feels like the speaker already mentally decided what should happen.
That's a very strong observation. Expectation usually carries stronger belief and stronger emotional certainty. Hope usually sounds emotionally lighter because disappointment is already accepted as possible.
So hope feels emotionally lighter because disappointment is already accepted as possible.
Yes, especially in friendly or emotional conversations. Let's imagine another situation. Suppose exam results are coming tomorrow. Which sentence feels softer? I hope I pass or I expect to pass?
I hope I pass sounds much more nervous and emotionally open. I expect to pass sounds much more confident.
And confidence itself changes the emotional atmosphere of the sentence. Sometimes expect sounds perfectly natural because stronger certainty makes sense in the situation.
So expect is not bad, it just creates stronger emotional pressure.
Exactly. Learners sometimes oversimplify vocabulary into correct and incorrect, but emotional tone depends heavily on context.
I think this explains why some English conversations feel emotionally strange even when the grammar is fine. The emotional pressure inside the sentence changes without learners noticing it.
That's very true. Let's compare another pair carefully. Imagine someone is waiting for an important phone call. I hope she calls me tonight. Then, I expect her to call me tonight.
The second sentence sounds like the speaker almost believes the other person has a responsibility to call.
Exactly. And that tiny emotional pressure changes the relationship feeling immediately. Native speakers notice those differences instinctively.
This topic feels much deeper than I expected, honestly. Earlier, I thought hope and expect were just simple vocabulary words.
That's because many English words carry emotional direction, not just literal meaning. Hope usually sounds emotionally open. Expect often sounds emotionally certain.
I'm realizing something now. Hope feels emotionally lighter because disappointment is already accepted as possible. Expect feels stronger because disappointment would feel more personal if things go wrong. That's a very advanced observation. Expectation creates emotional weight because the speaker mentally moves closer to certainty.
I think that's why I expect you to call me sounds heavier than I hope you call me. The second sentence leaves more emotional freedom.
Exactly. And native speakers choose between those feelings very carefully in relationships, workplaces, friendships, and emotional situations. This is why emotional tone matters so much in real English conversations.
I already feel like I'm going to start hearing hope and expect differently in movies and conversations now because the emotional difference suddenly feels very obvious.
What makes hope and expect difficult is that the same situation can sound emotionally different depending on which word you choose. Sometimes the event itself stays identical, but the emotional atmosphere changes completely.
That's what surprised me earlier because logically, the situations still feel similar. Someone either comes, calls, replies, or succeeds. But emotionally, the sentences don't feel equal at all.
Exactly. Let's look at a very simple situation. Imagine your friend is late to dinner. One person says, I hope he comes soon. Another person says, I expect him to come soon.
The first sentence sounds patient and uncertain. The second sounds firmer, almost like the speaker feels the friend should already be there.
That emotional pressure is the important difference. English doesn't only describe reality, it describes emotional confidence too.
That line explains the feeling perfectly because expect sounds emotionally closer to certainty, while hope still leaves space for doubt.
Exactly. Now, imagine a birthday situation. Suppose someone says, I hope my brother calls me today. That sounds emotionally open and slightly uncertain. But if they say, I expect my brother to call me today, the sentence suddenly sounds heavier emotionally.
It almost sounds like disappointment is already waiting in the background if the call doesn't happen.
That's a very strong observation because expectation creates emotional risk. The stronger the expectation becomes, the stronger disappointment usually feels afterwards.
I never thought vocabulary could quietly change emotional pressure this much.
That hidden emotional layer exists in many English conversations. Native speakers often choose hope because it sounds softer socially. Expect becomes stronger because it carries emotional certainty and sometimes responsibility too. Responsibility is interesting because I expect him to come sounds like the other person almost owes the action somehow.
Exactly. Let's look at another situation. Imagine waiting for exam results. I hope I pass sounds emotionally cautious. I expect to pass sounds much more confident and mentally committed.
The second sentence almost sounds dangerous emotionally because failure would probably hurt much more after saying that.
That's because expectation moves emotionally closer to certainty. Hope keeps emotional distance safer.
So when people say, I don't want to get my hopes up, they're almost protecting themselves emotionally.
Yes. And interestingly, people also say things like, don't expect too much, because expectation creates emotional pressure very quickly.
I think this explains why hope often sounds kinder in conversations. It gives people emotional freedom instead of pressure.
That's especially true in relationships. This is where learners accidentally sound demanding sometimes without realizing it.
That sounds slightly dangerous already.
It can be. Imagine someone texts their partner, "I hope you call me tonight." That sounds emotionally open and soft. Now compare it with "I expect you to call me tonight."
The second sentence sounds much more controlling. It feels less like a feeling and more like a requirement.
Exactly. And many learners accidentally create that tone because they only notice future meaning, not emotional force.
I think expect sounds emotionally heavier because the speaker already mentally prepared themselves for the action to happen.
That's correct. Now, imagine a workplace situation. Suppose a manager says, "I expect this report tomorrow." In that environment, expectation sounds normal because authority and responsibility already exist naturally.
Yes, that sentence feels much more acceptable there because the situation already includes professional expectations.
Exactly. But now imagine a friend casually saying, "I expect you to answer my messages immediately." Suddenly, the tone feels emotionally intense.
That almost sounds passive-aggressive.
That's because expectation affects relationship tone strongly. Context controls whether expectation feels natural, professional, demanding, or emotionally heavy.
I think learners often underestimate how much emotional meaning native speakers hear inside these small word choices.
Very true. Let's test another example. Imagine parents talking about their child. "We hope our son enjoys university." That sounds emotionally supportive. Now compare it with, "We expect our son to become a doctor."
The second sentence immediately sounds more pressuring. It feels like the child carries emotional responsibility now.
Exactly. Expectation often creates emotional weight for the other person too, not only for the speaker.
That's interesting because hope sounds emotionally shared, while expect sometimes sounds emotionally imposed.
That's a very advanced observation. Hope leaves emotional space. Expect closes space much more quickly.
I think I finally understand why "I expect you understand me" sounds emotionally stronger than "I hope you understand me."
Exactly. The second sentence sounds softer because misunderstanding still feels possible emotionally. The first sentence sounds much closer to certainty and emotional pressure.
This topic honestly changes how I hear conversations now. Earlier, I only heard vocabulary meaning. Now I hear emotional force too.
That's the deeper level of fluency many learners eventually discover. Native speakers constantly adjust emotional pressure through small vocabulary choices.
And I'm noticing that hope often sounds safer socially because it protects both people emotionally.
That's very true, especially in emotional or uncertain situations. Hope sounds softer because it accepts uncertainty naturally. Expect sounds stronger because it emotionally moves towards certainty.
I think this also explains why disappointment feels stronger after expectation than after hope.
Exactly, because expectation psychologically prepares the mind for certainty. Hope keeps emotional flexibility alive longer.
So learners are not only choosing between two future words, they're choosing emotional pressure level too.
That's exactly the hidden layer most people miss. Once learners start noticing emotional certainty inside English vocabulary, conversations suddenly become much deeper and much more human.
I think one of the most dangerous things about expect is that learners sometimes use it when they only want to sound confident or polite, but the sentence accidentally becomes emotionally intense instead.
I can already imagine myself doing that because expect sounds stronger and more advanced in my head. It feels more confident than hope.
That's exactly why many learners overuse it. But listen carefully to this sentence. "I expect you understand me."
That sounds emotionally heavy immediately. It almost feels confrontational somehow.
Exactly. Native speakers usually soften that feeling by saying something like, "I hope you understand," especially during emotional conversations or disagreements.
The second sentence feels much calmer emotionally. It sounds like the speaker is leaving space for misunderstanding instead of demanding agreement.
That emotional space matters a lot. Expectation can quietly sound demanding even when the speaker doesn't intend it that way.
I think expect sounds stronger because it feels like the speaker already decided what should happen emotionally.
That's a very accurate observation. Let's compare these carefully. I hope you can help me tomorrow. Then, I expect you to help me tomorrow.
The second sentence sounds like pressure immediately. It feels less like a request and more like responsibility.
Exactly. And that emotional pressure changes relationships very quickly. Hope usually sounds emotionally cooperative. Expect often sounds emotionally directional.
Directional is a good word because expectation feels like the speaker is emotionally pushing the future toward one result.
That's why expectation often appears naturally in authority situations. Teachers, managers, parents, and companies use expect more comfortably because expectations already exist socially there.
So context decides whether expectation sounds normal or emotionally controlling.
Exactly. Imagine a manager saying, I expect the project to be finished by Friday. That sounds professional and natural because workplace responsibility already exists.
But if a friend says, I expect you to spend the weekend with me, the emotional feeling changes completely.
Exactly. Suddenly, the sentence sounds emotionally heavier because personal relationships usually require more emotional softness and flexibility.
I'm noticing something interesting now. Hope feels emotionally safer because it protects both people from pressure.
That's very true. Hope protects emotional distance. Expectation reduces emotional distance because certainty becomes stronger.
I think that's why disappointment hurts more after expectation. The mind already emotionally prepared for certainty.
Exactly. Now, let's move into some real-life situations because this is where native speakers naturally choose emotional pressure very carefully.
Real situations help a lot because emotional tone becomes easier to feel naturally inside conversations.
Good. Imagine parents talking about their child's future. One parent says, I hope my daughter enjoys university. That sounds emotionally supportive and open.
Yes, that sounds caring without sounding controlling.
Now compare it with, I expect my daughter to become a lawyer.
That sounds much heavier emotionally. It feels like pressure already exists around the future.
Exactly. The emotional atmosphere changes immediately, even though both sentences discuss the future. Now imagine two friends talking about weekend plans. I hope you can come tonight. Sounds warm and flexible.
That sentence feels emotionally relaxed because the other person still has freedom.
Exactly. But now compare it with, I expect you to come tonight.
That sounds much more emotionally demanding. It almost feels like refusing would create guilt or disappointment.
That's because expectation creates emotional responsibility for the listener too. Native speakers choose those emotional levels very carefully, depending on relationship and situation.
I think learners often miss that emotional responsibility layer completely because we focus too much on direct translation.
That happens constantly. Let's imagine another situation. Suppose someone is waiting for a text reply. I hope she texts me back sounds emotionally uncertain, but emotionally open.
Yes, it sounds vulnerable but calm.
Now compare it with, I expect her to text me back.
That sounds emotionally stronger immediately. It feels like the speaker believes the reply should happen.
Exactly. And if the reply never comes, the emotional disappointment will probably feel much stronger too.
I'm realizing that hope emotionally accepts uncertainty before the result happens. Expect emotionally moves much closer to certainty already.
That's one of the deepest differences between these words. Native speakers constantly balance certainty and emotional pressure while choosing between them.
This honestly feels more like relationship psychology than vocabulary learning.
In many ways it is. English vocabulary often carries hidden emotional signals that native speakers notice automatically. Let's try another real-life situation. Imagine someone says, I hope this meeting goes well.
It sounds emotionally natural because meetings are uncertain situations.
Exactly. But if someone says, I expect this meeting to go well, the speaker suddenly sounds more confident and mentally committed to success.
The second sentence almost sounds like failure would feel personally frustrating afterward.
That's because expectation emotionally invests more heavily in one outcome. Hope keeps emotional flexibility alive longer.
I think this explains why hope sounds kinder during emotional conversations. It feels emotionally softer and less controlling.
That's especially true in friendships and relationships. Native speakers often soften emotional pressure intentionally by choosing hope instead of expect.
So learners are not only learning future vocabulary here, they're learning how emotional certainty changes conversations.
Exactly. And once learners start hearing emotional pressure inside English words, conversations become much more meaningful and much easier to understand naturally. I think the biggest realization from this conversation is that hope and expect are not really about future events only. They're about emotional distance from certainty.
That explains why the emotional feeling changes so strongly even when the situation itself stays the same. Earlier, I thought the difference was mostly vocabulary level. Now it feels much deeper psychologically.
That's because these words quietly change emotional pressure inside conversations. Expect closes space. Hope leaves space.
That line makes the whole topic feel much clearer because hope still sounds emotionally open to uncertainty, while expect feels emotionally closer to certainty already.
Exactly. And that emotional closeness changes relationships, disappointment, pressure, and tone without people consciously noticing it sometimes.
I think native speakers probably feel those emotional shifts automatically because they grew up hearing these words inside real emotional situations.
That's true. Learners often study vocabulary through direct meanings, but native speakers absorb emotional tone naturally through experience and relationships.
I'm noticing now that hope sounds emotionally lighter because the speaker emotionally accepts uncertainty before the result even happens. That's a very important insight. Hope emotionally protects openness. Expectation emotionally commits more strongly to one future result.
And once expectation becomes stronger, disappointment probably becomes stronger too.
Exactly. Expectation feels closer to certainty. Hope feels closer to trust.
Trust is interesting because hope feels emotionally softer and less controlling. It sounds like the speaker is emotionally allowing freedom instead of emotionally demanding an outcome.
That's why hope often sounds kinder in emotional conversations. Let's compare two examples carefully again. I hope you understand me, then I expect you to understand me.
The second sentence still feels emotionally intense to me, even after all this discussion. It sounds like misunderstanding would almost feel unacceptable.
Exactly. The first sentence emotionally accepts uncertainty. The second emotionally pushes towards certainty.
I think this topic changed how I hear emotional pressure in English now. Earlier, those differences felt invisible.
That hidden emotional layer exists in many English words, but hope and expect make it very easy to feel once learners start noticing emotional certainty.
I also think learners accidentally sound more demanding than they intend sometimes, because expect sounds more advanced or confident in our heads.
That happens very often. Learners sometimes choose stronger vocabulary thinking it sounds more fluent, but native speakers hear emotional force instead of vocabulary difficulty.
So, fluency is not choosing stronger words, it's choosing emotionally appropriate words.
That's a very advanced way to think about communication. Native speakers constantly adjust emotional pressure, depending on relationships, situations, and emotional closeness.
I honestly didn't expect this topic to feel so connected to relationships and psychology.
Language and emotion are deeply connected because people don't only react to literal meaning, they react to emotional tone, certainty, pressure, warmth, and openness too. I think this conversation also explains why some people sound emotionally softer in English even when discussing difficult situations. They often use hope instead of expect.
That's true, because hope softens emotional pressure naturally. It leaves emotional breathing room for both people in the conversation.
I want to test myself now because I'm curious whether my instinct about these words changed during this conversation.
Good idea. Imagine your friend has an important interview tomorrow. What would you say naturally?
I'd probably say, I hope everything goes well tomorrow. Earlier, I might have said, I expect you'll do well, because I thought it sounded more supportive and confident.
The first version sounds emotionally warmer because it emotionally supports the person without adding pressure.
Yes, now the second sentence feels slightly heavier emotionally. It sounds more emotionally certain instead of emotionally supportive.
Exactly. Now imagine another situation. Suppose a coworker promised to send an important document before evening. Which sentence feels more natural professionally? I expect the document before 5, or I hope I receive the document before 5.
In that situation, expect sounds more natural because workplace responsibility already exists.
Exactly. Context changes emotional appropriateness. Expectation feels more natural when responsibility or authority already exists socially.
So, neither word is automatically better. The emotional relationship decides which one feels natural.
That's the key insight. Native speakers constantly balance emotional certainty and emotional pressure, depending on context.
I think the most useful thing I learned today is that vocabulary carries emotional direction, not only literal meaning.
That understanding changes conversations completely because you stop hearing English as isolated words and start hearing emotional intention behind the words, too.
And honestly, now I'll probably notice hope and expect everywhere in movies and conversations because the emotional difference suddenly feels impossible to ignore.
That usually happens once learners become aware of emotional tone. English starts feeling much more human and much less mechanical afterward.
I also feel less pressure now to always choose the strongest English word. Sometimes softer language actually sounds more natural and emotionally intelligent.
That's a very important shift because natural communication often depends more on emotional awareness than vocabulary difficulty.
If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe and continue learning with us because some English words don't just change meaning, they change emotional feeling too.